Hello, and welcome to Protecht's Cyber Risk Management product demonstration. My name is Michael Franklin, and I'm going to be taking you through effectively this presentation for the next, let's say, 20 minutes. I'm the cybersecurity lead for Protecht's global operation, and look forward to introducing you to the new cyber risk management module. So a little bit about why Protecht. Some of the key aspects from a cyber perspective are more around our certifications we have with ISO 27001, our SOC 2 certified, and we're IRAP assessed for government organisations, which allow us up to a protected environment. We are international. Our HQ is in Australia, but we obviously have locations in the United Kingdom and the United States as well. So just a bit of housekeeping for the agenda today. We're looking at about 20 minutes. We're going to go through the problem statement, some of those key benefits as to why we are looking at cyber risk management, the risk and cyber life cycle, so how cyber risk management fits into the risk management life cycle. We'll go into a demo between 10 and 15 minutes, and then there'll be a webinar for any questions and a QR code to be able to click on that for any written questions you want to submit. Please note that the slides and the recording will be available after the webinar as well. So what's the key problem we're trying to address here, and what do we normally hear from some of our customers? Well, there's some key components around the fragmentation across the frameworks and control libraries for cyber IT control frameworks and control libraries. And some of those frameworks being the likes of NIST CSF and the control libraries, let's say, being NIST 853. So a large array of particular controls themselves. Another key problem is the fact that their risk management or cyber risk management is managed in spreadsheets and is distributed across multiple locations. And it could be through different technologies or it could be across different groups. So there's no consolidation of those key cyber risks. There's also some of those operational pain points when we talk about the high manual effort for linking of controls and frameworks with limited insights, so lack of reporting and assurance and audit inefficiency. So how do we essentially provide some level of coverage across the controls at an asset level as well? We also have very limited history in other tools that some of the issues we typically hear from customers and prospects. Lastly, but not the least, issue is more around the executive management. So managing reports at that lower aggregate or the lower level to the aggregate executive management and board level as well. So today we'll go through the centralized platform, how we look at mapping between those frameworks and better report the frameworks, the controls that are mapped to those frameworks, some analytics around that, and really what's the best around our return on investment for visibility, leverage, centralized risk taxonomy. So the whole idea is that we're leveraging the centralized frameworks, the centralized risk taxonomies and control taxonomies in order to drill down at that asset level for our cyber risks and control efficiency. A couple of the key items around cyber risk management and its key benefits. We talked about that stronger governance, bringing everything together. The framework-driven compliance. So we do have a number of frameworks, 20 plus frameworks, and we're continually mapping those frameworks. We also link them via the secure controls framework. So some of those examples we'll go through today are really around NIST and ISO, and that ability to map the frameworks to one-to-many controls or many-to-many controls, and also map other frameworks to those framework requirements so that we can comply to multiple frameworks, testing those individual controls. We also have the risk monitoring audit readiness, so we can provide that real-time posture to the likes of ISO auditors. And also we have that ability to be able to leverage those other components within the enterprise risk management products. So those would include things like vendor risk management, operational resiliency, and the enterprise risk components. So just to recap on our risk lifecycle, we effectively revolve everything around our central libraries and how they relate to our business strategic objectives. So effectively, the cyber module fits in there very nicely around the identify, assess, monitor, review, respond, recover, treat, and improve. And the IT cyber risk also links nicely or beautifully into the vendor risks, operational resiliency, and also the aggregate operational risks as well to the enterprise level. When we talk about the cyber risk management workflow, we actually look more at our 7-step process, which is ensuring that we establish the context by establishing those frameworks and how they align with the business objectives. We identify the risks that are in place, and we can do that through a number of ways, through our cyber risk assessments and then our asset risk assessments, utilising those. But typically we move into the cyber workspace to conduct the risk identification, for then the asset risk assessment, so where we've identified all of those assets, and then where we can apply the risk analysis where we've got the cyber controls and how we sort of test those and detect non-compliance or poor effectiveness of those controls. We then move into the evaluation, and this is really looking at how we conduct or create those statements of applicability, how we test all of those components, and how we ensure that we're meeting our requirements. Then also, when we move to requirements, we look at how we monitor and review those requirements through our monitoring and our policy management, where we can maintain and monitor exceptions to policies and look at how we manage that and link that to our risks. Finally, then we move into how we communicate all of this and how we communicate it at the analyst level. So when we're using a particular persona at a cyber analyst or a cyber manager level to effectively report through to the CISO, the Chief Information Security Officer, the CIO, and senior executives, all the way to the board. So we can cover all of those different aspects. So now we're going to move into the demonstration itself. And first of all, you'll see that we're presented with our overall risk in motion dashboard, which is effectively our overall corporate health score. We have some key requirements that we need to ensure that are consistent across our taxonomy, and they include our risks. So today we'll be going into our cyber risks, and we'll be mainly focusing on external cyber attacks. We also ensure that we have our core frameworks in place. Now, in this case, you'll see I've got 10 frameworks here. We'll only use a couple of those particular frameworks for this particular example. And the frameworks we'll use today will include NIST CSF and ISO 27001. Now, these particular frameworks will be presented through our cyber risk management module as well. And then lastly, we have our controls, and these are our central controls where we can perform at any level our control effectiveness testing, and they will include our design and operating effectiveness testing. This is also the control libraries that will include all of our enterprise controls as well as our cybersecurity controls. And here you can see I've got some cybersecurity controls with their effectiveness and their testing frequency as well. So let's move into the cyber dashboard. And what you're presented here is effectively a menu structure that on the left really looks at the prioritization of the tasks at hand. So the first task that we have is around our cyber actions. Now, this is assuming that you've already got the cyber actions in there or remediation activities in place from different areas of our cyber risk management module. So on the left-hand side, we have our key menu items, and also we're presented with our frameworks that are applicable for our organisation, or at least our cybersecurity team. And then we go through our individual tasks where we perform the cyber risk assessments, which utilise our threat library, our vulnerability libraries. We can then identify any assets against those risks that have been assessed. And also we can assess those assets themselves in their own risk assessment process. We can highlight any incidents, and these are mainly cyber incidents that need some level of investigation. We can manage our policies and documents and our exception management of our policies and documents. And also, we can perform any penetration tests and link those to the assets. Finally, we can then schedule all of these tasks within our calendar and report and manage those particular tasks, which then automatically go through a workflow tooling. Finally, we have the ability on the left-hand side to add additional registers. Here I've got a vendor register that we'll move into a little bit later. We can have the likes of questionnaires, internal questionnaires, any vendor finding an issue that's been highlighted, and we can also display any critical operations that the assets that we have are linked to, and how we can report on that further down through our operational resiliency. So here we've got an all-in-one pane of glass, really, that will give you all of your cyber tasks, and it'll give you your reporting as well. Now, when we talk about the metrics, you have the ability for each of these particular tasks to actually highlight some key metrics that you might be wanting to investigate, or you may want to use for key management metrics. Now here, I'm monitoring two particular frameworks. I'm monitoring the likes of my ISO implementation framework, and also, let's say, my NIST CSF compliance. So what sort of percentage am I complying to for both compliance and implementation? I'm also calling out which controls are not implemented and where do we need to sort of concentrate on. And this is an area that we can drill straight into. Also, you'll see I've got some extreme risks that I can highlight, and I can click on my open incidents, and this will take me straight into my incident library for the incidents I'm more concerned with. Now, all of these metrics can be configured, and you can have multiple metrics tables in here as well. So here you'll see I've got a number of other metrics around critical assets, policies, and this is really my starting point for order of prioritization. Also within the table itself, you'll be presented a default view that will also have an order of prioritization. Typically with cyber actions and most of these particular registers, it'll be through prioritization, it'll be through due date and completion. So where do we need to concentrate our effort, and where are these particular items coming from? And they'll be telling you from the source destination. Now, as an example, if I were a Chief Information Security Officer and I wanted to know which controls I haven't got implemented for my ISO implementation, or I want to know my overall implementation status, I can just click on one of these particular metrics, and what it will do is it'll take me through to the controls not fully implemented. Now you'll see I've got this grouped by the functional requirement of the 27001, and I'm able to drill into a certain section as well. I can actually filter on implementation. Let's just say the ones that I want to see that are in planning stage. I can drill down further, or I can filter on those particular control requirements and go into the details of those control requirements. And all of these, as you can see, are being assessed in our framework assessment. So this is where we build up effectively the applicable framework requirements and the controls that can show effectiveness or completion of that framework requirement. Now, in this particular case, I can actually drill in to a particular control, and this particular control is a cloud service control, and I can see that through the fact that this is a cloud service control. it's applicable, it's in planned stage, and the overall control effectiveness is not effective. If I drill down even further into this particular control, I'm then presented with a number of requirements around our framework assessment. Now, the beauty of the framework assessment is that you can build up this requirement, and you could call this building up your statement of applicability if you're looking at ISO certification. But typically, these are your framework requirements that can be applicable to just the organization, can be applicable at the business unit level and at the asset level. So it removes some of that duplication required in duplicating controls for different areas for applicability that are specific to a business unit or an asset. This allows you to do all of those, a number of times. Here you can see I've actually got it specified for the asset and business unit level, and you can see I have an asset associated to this particular record. And this is coming from our asset database. It is applicable. We have business units, we have an implementation method, we have some controls, overall control effectiveness, and we have some level of scoring that we can manage this. Also, if this wasn't effective and we needed to do something, we can assign an action here, one or multiple actions to multiple people. Now, this is just an indication of how you would perform a framework assessment and how a CISO or a cybersecurity manager would look at, well, what do they need to do in order to meet their ISO implementation framework requirement? We also have the ability to report on a framework requirement as well. So here we're presented with a number of dashboards, and those dashboards, typically we start off with an overall controls dashboard, which we can filter by framework. And this particular report, we can actually look at a 27001 dashboard, and we can actually drill into that dashboard, and we can expand the dashboard so we get full view of all of the sections that we have in the framework, and we can then filter on what is applicable and where do we need to concentrate our effort. So we can look at overall control effectiveness, so where it's not assessed and not effective, and maybe even partially effective. Where we can look at it's partially implemented and planned. These are going to be the key requirements that we're going to be concerned with. So partially implemented and planned, we've got about 50 sections we need to either implement or perform some level of assessment against. So you can see here, I've got out of the 124, I've got about 50 that need some level of attention. And you can see through clauses 4 to 10 and our Annex A 5 to 8 controls, what we've actually got as partially implemented and planned, what's our percentage completion there. And this will then allow you to drill into each of the requirements as per the framework assessment we went through earlier, to then look at the implementation and the effectiveness of that particular requirement. This is just one example of a dashboard that we can look at there. We also have a number of other dashboards that we can filter on from a framework point of view, look at history, look at framework gap assessments, and these are more around our framework requirements and how we report on those. We can also report on other areas. So we can report on effectively our actions dashboard, and this will help us with our overall remediation activities, who's assigned to which particular item and what level of prioritization do we need to demonstrate. So this would be another example of a dashboard that we can look at full view, which will show us a trend, the priority effort, overdue, what's up and coming, and then the individual action details. And of course, we can filter on a date range for all of these particular items. So when it comes to our frameworks, we can look at the frameworks that are applicable to us. And here you can see we've got an example of a ISO framework where it's breaking out our clauses 4 to 10 and our Annex A controls. And here you'll notice that we've got a couple of controls linked to it. And this is where we can actually link our frameworks together with other frameworks, and we can utilize those set of controls for multiple frameworks. So here I've got a framework requirement. I've got it linked to another framework requirement. So this is NIST CSF. I've got some controls that are set up to demonstrate how we will meet this framework requirement and any linked framework requirements, and where we've performed that assessment, what's applicable to the organization. So which controls have been applicable to the organization. So these are all rolled up into our central location or our core libraries that we can access from our cyber risk management module. Some of those other tasks that we talked about are around our cyber risk assessment. We can quickly go into the cyber risk assessment where we have metrics again for all of our cyber risks. We can go into the details of a cyber risk assessment, and you can note that effectively we will typically have a risk that we will identify from our core library. And you'll notice that we're looking at our core library here. So this is where we roll up and utilize our risk taxonomies. What is the risk description? What are some of the threats? Have we got any vulnerabilities where we can add it from our vulnerability library, or should I say register? And then where we can identify our impacts, any financial impact for our estimated annual loss based on our frequency, where we can determine our inherent risk rating, our residual risk rating based on our controls and their effectiveness, and then identify any remediation activities based on our target risk rating. We also have the ability to link to any audit issues and findings. We can link to assets, and then it goes through a review cycle, and this will go through, at this stage, a quarterly review based on the frequency. So the cyber risk utilises the threats and vulnerabilities. We have an asset library as well. This asset library allows us to manage and monitor effectively our asset classes. And those asset classes are determined by your organisation, and we will be able to identify the key components and identify the criticality of that particular asset itself. Once you've identified the asset, you can use those asset risk assessments to perform those risk assessments on an ongoing basis and identify any incidents as well. So this is just a quick preview of the new cyber risk module. You can see there's a lot involved, but look, it's simple to set up because it utilizes all of those central core control, risk, and framework taxonomies, and it allows you to really grow with the organization and be able to present a risk on a page and present a risk profile back to the organization. Now, I really appreciate your time in reviewing this particular demonstration. And look, I'd like to say thank you and look forward to the post-webinar survey. So if you need any further information, please feel free to be in touch. Thank you again. Bye-bye.